Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the event. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, Ajahn Nathanan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to this esteemed panel discussion on the topic, Ambassador Talk, 1 Year in Ruins, the Russo-Ukrainian War and Prospects of Peace. Co-organized by the Center for European Studies at Chulalongkorn University and our Faculty of Political Science. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, known as the Russo-Ukrainian War, is a matter of great concern for the international communities. It has resulted in a loss of life, displacement of people, and widespread destruction, leaving a devastating impact on both countries and the region as a whole. The war has also strained relations between Russia and the West and raised questions about the stability and security of Europe. It is a complex and multifaceted conflict with a long history and deeply rooted tensions. That is why it is important that we come together to better understand the wars and explore potential avenues for peace. To this end, we are honored to have a group of highly distinguished ambassadors from leading countries in Europe who will provide us with their unique perspectives and insights on the Russo-Ukrainian War. It is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists for today's discussions. This is a big event we have, for ambassadors. The first ambassador, His Excellency Mr. David Daly, Ambassador of the European Union to Thailand. The second ambassador, His Excellency Mr. I hope I pronounce it right, Waldemar Dubaniowski, Ambassador of Poland. Okay. The third ambassador, His Excellency, Mr. Georg Schmidt, Ambassador of Germany. And of course, the last but not least, His Excellency, Mr. Juili Järvihaho, from the Ambassador of Finland. And of course, one of our most important guests, our moderator, Associate Professor Dr. Nathanan Kunama, the Director of the Center for European Studies, or Ajahn Nan. I am confident that their insights will contribute to rich and enlightening discussion. It is my sincere hope that through this panel, we can gain a better understanding of the Russo-Ukrainian War and move closer to finding a lasting and peaceful resolution. So without further ado, I would like to extend my warmest welcome to our panelists and thank them for taking their time to participate in this important conversation. I invite you all to sit back, relax, and be prepared to engage in a thought-provoking and enlightening discussion. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.
Good evening, Professor Prokon, Excellencies, professors, colleagues, and all participants here. In the last 12 months after Russia's aggression on Ukraine since 24 February 2022, this is the third event we have arranged to raise an awareness on this war. The first academic seminar was arranged a month after a war, so at the first quarter. The second seminar was after Russia's illegal referendum and annexation of 4 Ukrainian provinces in the third quarter. And in a couple of days, the war will reach its first year. So this is enough reason that we meet again for the third time. The Center was so honored that we have 4 honorable ambassadors with us who show solidarity with Ukraine and stay with Ukraine. Thank you so much again. Before listening to reflections from each ambassador, let me briefly summarize what happened in the last 12 months because we have a lot of students registered here. From the first quarter of the war, Russia occupied large part of eastern and southern Ukraine. However, this Kremlin-coined special operation did not seem to be quick and finished, as Kremlin has thought. I will use the word Kremlin and Moscow a lot because I still believe that they were good Russian civil society, if you don't mind. So Kremlin's miscalculation are coupled with Western armed support to Ukraine, and more importantly, the fierce resistance from the Ukrainian make this special operation by President Putin cannot be achieved in the short time. And also since the first quarter, mass genocide in Bucha was revealed. In the second quarter, the war turned to be the war of attrition, especially on the Russian side. Ukraine, this is because Ukrainian counter-offensive operation and also the lightning counter-offensive operation was successful, especially in July, and trying to retake Kherson and other lands occupied by Russia. So the war of attrition seems to be on Russian side, that they seem not to be advanced much and they wasted a lot of resources. And in the third quarter, this war of attrition severed Russia greatly. We have heard from the news that President Putin announced partial mobilization of เกณฑ์ทหารเพิ่ม on 21st September, making many Russian males flee the country. Moreover, Kremlin started illegal referendum and annexation of 4 Ukrainian provinces, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, at the end of September. So now we come to the fourth quarter. Ukraine successfully attacked against Russia's supply line and command posts in southern Ukraine. Ukraine forces were able to enter Kherson. Russia continued to launch series of missile attacks on civilian buildings and Ukraine power grid. And this Kremlin's campaign of terror greatly suffered civilians. Regarding the EU and member state responses, EU launched series of unprecedented sanctions on trade, finance, freezing assets of Russian oligarchs, and banning aircraft. Almost all EU member states act in solidarity. What is crucial is that there's a shift in EU external policies, and EU start to support Russian in terms of military aid and arms. It's the first time to the third countries. So we have our first panelist, the European Union, our ambassador to Thailand, His Excellency Mr. David Daly. Ambassador Daly, the war has been 1 year already. What is your reflections regarding the EU on this? So it's quite open talk. So the floor is yours, please.
Relax, everybody. This always happens to me. Firstly, can I express my great appreciation for being here this afternoon with you, and for being at the center. It's an important center within the university, and I very much want to support it and the work you're doing. My reflections center around 3 thoughts. The first is that we come to the first year since the invasion, and I think it is good to do a certain stock taking of just what it has meant in human tragedy terms in the first instance. The second thought I want to mention is that there is a trap which none of us should fall into. Whether we are in Thailand, we are elsewhere in Asia, or indeed whether we are in Europe. The third thought I want to express is to share with you what I see as three strategic mistakes or miscalculations that have been made by President Putin, especially about the European Union. So firstly, the stock-taking on Russia's unjustified and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Let us recall that over 18,000 civilians have been killed or injured, of which over 1,150 children. Millions of refugees from Ukraine have fled abroad. 1.5 million Ukrainians are internally displaced elsewhere within Ukraine. It's estimated that almost 18 million Ukrainians require humanitarian assistance. Almost 6 million kids cannot go to school. There is clear evidence of war crimes. There is the economic damage to factories, to infrastructure, to agricultural land. And there's the global impacts that we see in terms of global food security, inflation, energy impacts, and so on. The conclusion I draw from this stock-taking is that nothing justifies all of this death, destruction, and dislocation. Nothing. My second thought is built around a trap that none of us should fall into. And this is the trap to think that somehow the war in Ukraine is some faraway war happening in Europe, nothing to do with me. But this is not just a European war. This is an attack on all of us everywhere in the world. It is an unprecedented violation of fundamental values and principles of international law. The UN Charter must be protected and upheld. Concepts and principles such as respect for territorial integrity, internationally recognized borders, sovereignty, and so on, these flow from the UN Charter. And the UN Charter is something which is for all of us. Whether one is European or Thai or African or Latin American, we together have built this system. And we've built it because we want to regulate and have a system for how we conduct international relations between countries. And in this sense, there is a very basic choice. We either have international relations based on law and rules and negotiation on the one hand, or we have them based on the principle of right is might. In other words, military power is the only thing that matters. And with this, I think we should all want to feel that military aggression should not be acceptable in today's world. And it applies everywhere. There are hotspots in many places, including in Asia. And the question is, in Asia, whether you want those issues in those hotspots to be regulated based on the principle of military might, whether it's the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Taiwan Straits, the Korean Peninsula, wherever. So this is a global issue of how to conduct our international relations. This is for all of us. Now, this is even particularly dangerous because Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, which is the highest body within the UN to guarantee peace and security around the world. So when a member of the Security Council, a permanent member, is invading a smaller neighbor, this is extremely dangerous. And Russia is, let us not forget, a nuclear power. At some levels, it may be difficult to fully comprehend the enormity of the implications of this war. And we have really had to learn to, quote, think the unthinkable. We had thought that this type of imperialistic war was confined to the past, to a different era. We had never imagined that a permanent member of the Security Council would invade its neighbor. And we had thought that nuclear war was unthinkable. But we hear threats of the use of nuclear weapons by Russia. Now, this week, there is another opportunity for the world to reject war and to choose peace through a resolution which is going through the United Nations General Assembly, a resolution on the UN Charter principles underlying a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. We expect a wide endorsement by the vast majority of UN member states. It's already being co-sponsored by, I think, 64 plus countries, including European Union member states. And we, as the European Union, we urge all UN member states to support this resolution. I come to my third thought, which hinges on three strategic miscalculations by President Putin about the European Union. The first is that the EU would collapse into disunity in the face of the challenges. This was wrong. The EU has acted in unity, strongly, and quickly. We have adopted 9 packages of sanctions in record time. Sanctions are aimed at weakening Russia's economic ability to wage war. The sanctions do not cover agriculture and food products. Our sanctions are part of an international effort comprising 40 countries, representing half of the world's GDP, incidentally. We are part of that effort. And we can see that it is having an impact on the Russian economy. We've seen the EU use new tools in this regard. The new European Peace Facility has been used to help deliver military supplies and training to defend Ukraine. And we've seen politically the EU 27 member states accepting Ukraine as a candidate country for EU membership. We also see, when we step back from some of this detail, we see the EU has become a much stronger actor in the security area and as an international political actor. The war has galvanized the EU's resolve, not the reverse. The second strategic mistake is that the EU public would reject the millions of refugees Wrong. Refugees have been welcomed across the EU, even if the burden has so far fallen mainly on those member states bordering Ukraine. But there are Ukrainian refugees now throughout the European Union, including in remote parts, western parts of the Union. So there is a burden sharing, and the European public have not rejected their responsibilities in this regard. Strategic mistake number 3, that the EU was too dependent on Russian energy supplies to help Ukraine, and that the EU economy would be destroyed. Again, wrong. The EU member states, the European Investment Bank were giving enormous help to Ukraine. 50 billion euro. 25 billion euro in macro-financial assistance and budget support to help keep the country running. That means to help keeping hospitals, schools, administration functioning. We've given $500 million in humanitarian assistance. We've given $500 million in-kind help. We've given 12 billion in terms of military assistance, including 3 billion from the new European Peace Fund facility. The European Union is rising to the challenge of energy. Better energy efficiency, switching energy suppliers away from Russia, more renewable energy. None of this is easy. This is all extremely difficult and challenging. But Europeans are taking up that challenge. I think history will show that this war will have acted as a strong accelerator for EU energy policy and climate change actions. And it is particularly a strategic mistake from the side of President Putin, because the EU will never go back to its previous energy dependency on Russia. That is crystal clear. Also, the European economy has not collapsed. Growth last year, over 3%. This year, it will be down 0.5 percentage point. Next year, it will be back up to almost 2%. Same in 2025. So, overall conclusions that I draw from an EU perspective. Firstly, this war has been especially shocking for us as the EU. We have had to think the unthinkable. We had thought that those days of large countries invading their neighbors, trying to impose imperialistic spheres of influence, that those days were over. Europe has suffered enormously from that way of conducting relations between countries. And we in the European Union have put over 70 years into creating a space where former enemies would work politically and economically together around the negotiation table instead of through war between themselves, as we have seen every 50 years going back centuries. I draw the conclusion that the UN membership must reject the idea that military aggression can be rewarded. Otherwise, there are very, very serious implications around the world wherever there are geopolitical hotspots, including in Asia. And therefore, we must all fight for the respect of the principles we believe in, the UN principles I mentioned earlier. Otherwise, we will all live in a very different and much more dangerous world. The goal of the European Union, and that of many others in the international community, is for a democratic Ukraine to prevail, pushing out the invader, restoring its full sovereignty, and with that, restoring international legality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Daly. Ambassador Daly did point out that this war is not only European problems, but it's become global problems. It's a kind of attack to our rule-based international order that we adhere for a long time. And Ambassador Daly has drawn out the numbers of miscalculation from the Russian side, right? That be aware that especially we start from a student aware about the energy crisis that Europe won't survive this winter, but it turns out that European states be able to find the substitute and be able to find renewable energy and also be able to cut the dependency on Russian energy. And also to the bigger picture, European integration. This war make the EU become stronger and also become the larger humanitarian actors, like accepting over 8 million of refugees, and also the miscalculation on the sanctions of the EU. It turns out that overnight packages of unprecedented sanctions did suffer Russia greatly. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Now we move to 3 individual states, starting with Poland. Can we put on Poland slide from Ambassador? Okay, starting from Poland. Poland is the first country, if I'm not wrong, to supply Ukraine tanks, okay? In terms of security policy, Poland already reached over 3% of GDP of military spending and now plan to spend 5% of GDP, equipped with more modern weapons, which show massive rearmament programs of the country, will become largest land army in the EU. And more importantly, Poland is main humanitarian actor by receiving over 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees in the country. Ambassador of Poland to Bangkok, His Excellency Mr. Valdimar Dumaniewski is with us here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Kunamas. Thank you very much, Professor Prakorn as well. And let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for organizing this debate, because it's my personal impression that the more time passed and the farther from Europe we are, the less credible information is being provided and less chances we have to understand the real situation in Ukraine. So, having said that, I would like to say something related to the introduction which had been made by Professor Prakorn. Because in my opinion, definitions are really important. Terms are really important as well. Therefore, if you allow me, distinguished professor, I have to say that I slightly differ from you just said during the introduction. Because in my opinion, it is not a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It is simply Russian aggression of Ukraine. And there is the situation we have to deal with where there's one country which is invader, one country which is aggressor, and another country which had been invaded and which has to be defended, and is the country which is brave enough to still fight in almost a heroic way. So again, I would like to emphasize, it's not the conflict, it's the simply Russian aggression of Ukraine. So I have to say that it's also a very sad moment, as precisely or almost precisely 1 year of Russian invasion already passed, and there is still, unfortunately, no light in the tunnel. Russia continues their crazy idea of invading neighboring country, and for over a year, the fight for the principles of international order and universal value has been based on Ukrainians' heroism and commitment, of course supported by multi-dimensional aid and assistance offered by international community, including European Union, including US, including some other players as well. So today, I have to say that I don't have any special presentation, but I prepared just one very symbolic slide that looks like the one behind me. So let's repeat. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. But if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. So, to be completely honest, after our panel discussion today, this is definitely a motto I would like you guys to remember, because it also helped a lot to understand Ukraine's determination, the EU determination, and US determination in supporting Ukraine. We don't want and will not allow Ukraine to disappear, because it would have caused, so to speak, domino effect, affecting some other countries and other regions as well. So I have to say that's probably the most important, the most difficult and dangerous problem the world has to deal with nowadays. And I deliberately, absolutely deliberately, I use an expression word to emphasize that it's definitely not a local issue, but the global problem with global consequences. Consequences like a threat for global security and stability, danger of nuclear threat, and finally, and it's not exaggeration, and finally, the threat of World War III. This is the situation we are dealing with. So this is really extremely serious situation. But on a bit more optimistic note, I have to say that I don't believe in coincidence. Much more I believe in destiny. And today's date is being selected perfectly for this event, or even symbolically, because precisely today, President Biden started his visit to Poland. Yesterday, he was in Kiev, met with President Zelensky, and today he started his visit in Poland, and he's going to deliver his most important, crucial speech related to the anniversary of Russia's invasion. So definitely it was extremely well selected. So our debate is absolutely timely. So, and I have to say and I'm proud of it, that Poland, besides Ukraine, of course, is the only country on Biden itinerary. And this is a very clear signal of how important Polish-US relations are and how important for both countries is support for Ukraine. And I have to quote an American ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzeziński, by the way, the son of the excellent former American politician Zbigniew Brzeziński, Secretary of State. And Mark Brzeziński, the ambassador to Poland, has mentioned that this is a historic moment, and he's proud to be the ambassador to Poland at this very moment. The whole world is now looking at Poland, and that is why President Biden is coming here. Definitely is a very historic moment, without any doubt. By the way, and this is absolutely not that optimistic anymore, because, by the way, President Biden's trip to Poland coincides with Russian President Vladimir Putin's annual State of the Nation address, scheduled for 21st of February as well, when he is expected, unfortunately, to announce a new military offensive in Ukraine this coming spring. And just to remind you, in 2022, just a year ago, instead of the customary address, Putin recognized Ukraine's separatist regions of Lugansk and Donetsk as independent. And it is how it started. And then he gave an address in the early hours of February 24th, before Russian tanks began rolling into Ukraine. So, definitely, in my opinion, outside of Europe, wherever, in Asia as well, in Thailand as well, in some other South Asian country, education's process about Putin's war, about Putin's Russia, is absolutely needed. So, I have to say that currently, Ukraine's biggest donor is Biden's administration. But just after the European Union as total, I don't want to separate Poland from Germany, Germany from Finland or some other countries, but definitely EU is one of the very important and significant donors as well. But there's still there's ongoing support which is being needed. So every single support from Asia is also being welcomed. Substantial support, moral support, psychological support, and legal support as well. Ambassador David Daly just mentioned there is a chance in the near future to show this sort of support during next voting in United Nations General Assembly. Hopefully, there will be the solidarity in voting. So that's let's cross our fingers. Especially that some expectation for softening of Putin's position are not especially great. As some of the American officials expressed, there's little hope for talks. And even the White House National Security Council spokesperson, John Kirby, he told in November that Putin has shown absolutely zero indication that he is willing to negotiate. I repeat, absolutely zero indication that he is willing to negotiate. And it's always extremely difficult to discuss and to start negotiation with someone who is not interested at all. I would say quite on the contrary. Everything he is doing on the ground and in the air shows a man who wants to continue the violence process, and the one who would like to show his strength, which is absolutely miscalculation, as it had been mentioned already. And after 1 year of invasion, we already know how barbaric Russian invasion is. If you recall Bucha massacre that Professor Kunamaska has already mentioned. If you recall all these bombings over civilian facility. So this is something hardly imaginable in the 21st century. So this is not just conflict. Again, I repeat again, is the invasion, and barbaric invasion. And please believe me, we know, I mean we in Poland, what we are talking about, as Poland is practically the front country. We are a neighboring country to Ukraine, and we are also on the front line of all these hostilities. And of course, after the initial plans for a blitzkrieg, which failed in March 2020, Russia shifted a strategy and devastating war with indiscriminate bombings and violence against civilians became one of its key tactics. That's true. It's not just on a battlefield, it's also the tactics directed into the civilian facilities and civilians themselves. And we in Poland, we experience this consequence of the war on a daily basis. Majority of refugees usually escapes to Poland or through Poland. We already gave a shelter to almost 3 million Ukrainians, and everything without any single refugee camp. So we know precisely what we are talking about. And immediately after the invasion, we started convincing our friends from Europe that supporting Ukraine by sending them weapons and ammunition, it should be considered as a priority number one. And I have to say, we were absolutely right. Because it's still the case. Ukraine needs support, Ukraine needs weapons, Ukraine needs ammunition as well. And by the way, I have to say, it was not for the first time that our assessment and analysis was fully correct. It happened already before the invasion, when this famous pipeline, gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2 had been constructed. And at that time already, we warned our friends that is being creation of monster. The monster which will be used as a blackmailing instrument potentially used by Russia. And Russians, or Putin, he was not hesitant. He really started this blackmailing activity with energy sources. And therefore, and this is really important, therefore sanctions are truly important. Its goal is not only targeting oligarchs and generals. Its goal is also targeting the ordinary Russians, because they have to experience all these difficulties, shortages, and all the problems on a daily basis. To start making slowly but surely sort of the consequent growing pressure on Putin and some other members of the party. Having said that, also a couple of days ago, I believe 3 days ago, It's also important that what U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said in Munich. She accused Russia of committing crimes against humanity. It's very important. This is not the humble ambassador just mentioned. This is something what Vice President of US mentioned, that Russia committed crimes against humanity. And this is what she said. We know that the legal standards, we have examined the evidence. We know the legal standards, and there is no doubt there are crimes against humanity. So, in my opinion, it doesn't sound very optimistically, but at the end of the day, what we can observe, what we can feel, there is the growing solidarity among all these nations and among all the friends of Ukraine. So another miscalculation to add to the one which Ambassador Daly already provided. This is that there will be some sort of disagreement between EU and US. And it's absolutely not the case. On the contrary, the alliance between the US and the EU has become even stronger than ever. We are both, we, EU and US, we are both on the same page. And we know that priority number one is support for Ukraine. So I believe that this group of the countries which try to show the solidarity and understanding for Ukraine is much bigger than just EU and US. I believe that here in this region, in Southeast Asia, especially people in Southeast Asia, they truly believe and they try to show solidarity with Ukraine. So this is the moment probably I would like to stop here, because I hope there will be also another round for some other intervention. Thanks you a lot. And guys, remember the one. This is something you should keep in mind.
Hello. Thank you, Ambassador Dubrovsky. Ambassador did leave us a lot of points, especially for the younger generation, starting from we need to raise awareness of this war in the higher education institution as well, because this continue 365 days already, right? Even Thai students and Poland assistance to Ukraine that Ambassador just pointed out was immense in terms of military and humanitarian. And more important than that, Ambassador outlined the importance of alliance of the Western Front, especially the roles of the US and President Biden in aiding aiding Ukrainian to fight this war. And last but not least, please do remember, if Russia stop fighting, there will be no war. I'm starting to remember by heart already. And if Ukraine stop fighting, there will be no Ukraine. Thank you so much. Now we move next to Germany, and Russia invasion in Ukraine create a turn in German foreign policy, so-called Zeitenwende, and there were translation as an epochal tectonic shift and challenged the former New East politics or Neue Ost politics since Chancellor Willy Brandt to Russia. After a decade of below NATO 2% of GDP, now Germany tried to achieve 2% target, and German lawmakers just passed over 100 billion euro to strengthen country's armed force. And also Germany received over 1 million of Ukrainian refugees. and Germany survived and cut the dependency on Russian energies. I hope Ambassador will point out in this round or on the second round. We have German ambassador to Bangkok with us here, His Excellency Mr. Georg Schmidt. So let's hear it from Ambassador Schmidt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. And I admire you, like when I was at the university, after sort of 15, 20 minutes of people talking in front of me, I would slowly go into like a state of like, oh my God, and not another one. Similar voice, similar tonality. So really, chapeau. And the fact that you're sitting here and that you're interested in it serves as a great encouragement to us as ambassadors from European countries who often think like, why is this so important? And many people say that, why are you so concerned? Aren't there other conflicts in the world? And I would always answer, yes, there are many other conflicts in the world. Before I came here, I was Africa director. I was very much involved in other conflicts and wars in the world. And I think we have a very terrible situation in Myanmar with millions of people suffering with aerial attacks of a government against its own people. And the same way that I think we're trying to raise awareness of what's happening in Ukraine, we're also trying to raise awareness back home that, yes, it's an immediate threat, and I will talk about it a little bit later, but also we must also see like the world from a different perspective. And if I look at the war in Yemen, which has been going on for years and years, if I look at other wars, it's terrible, and we have a lot of them. I would like to structure my intervention along 2 points. One is to pick up on what you said, Zeitenwende, what it means for us in Germany. And the second, I would try to look a little bit forward also, because we all remember what happened before the invasion. I remember very clearly how Russian government officials sort of said, oh, nothing is happening, it's all a ruse, this is all a lie, it's propaganda, nobody plans an invasion. And we knew what happened. And it's difficult because I remember also when our chancellor went to Moscow just a few days before the invasion and talked to Putin. And we said, look, don't do it. There will be consequences. There will be economic and political consequences. So it's not that we didn't try to talk. The French president went there. You remember the pictures of the long, long table with President Putin. And as a diplomat, I believe that we should always exploit any possibility to have a talk. But it's difficult to talk to someone who has lied right into your face. Not that easy. But let me start with Zeitenwende. 3 days after the invasion, our chancellor stood up in parliament and gave a very long speech. And that said, this is a change. We can't continue as before. And some of the points were mentioned. And the most important was definitely an upgrading and a realization that we do need to have more hard power. Germany, because of its history and because of also something that's very normal, politicians like to spend money more on education, social services, housing, infrastructure than on the army. We did not spend enough on our defense, and we strongly believe that by building bridges into Russia, economic bridges, and civil society, etc., that we could reduce the possibility of an armed conflict or of a war. And there was a big disappointment, a huge disappointment, that despite all this, what you described as Ostpolitik, we can have a long discussion about it, yet on the 24th of February we saw an invasion. By the way, the Ukrainians would say the war had started already in 2014. Let's not forget about this. It started with Crimea. And you can criticize the German position from 2 different angles. And it's a very important policy debate in Germany as well. One is we were too soft on Russia all the way along. And this was a criticism which came from many people in Poland, many people in the Baltic countries. They said, look, you're naive, you underestimate the aggression, the aggressive nature and Russian imperialism, and you're being too soft on it for political, emotional, but also economical purposes. And you mentioned the discussion on Nord Stream, and it was a policy controversy which created deep rifts in the European Union and also between us and our allies. Let's not make a mistake about it. So that was one way of criticizing. You were too naive. You were too kind with Russia. The other one was like saying, you are too hard with Russia. If you had listened to President Putin, and he gave you so many warning signals, don't come closer, don't come closer, don't come closer, gave a speech also at the Munich Security Conference, then this whole thing wouldn't have happened. And this is also an argument which you hear quite a lot in Germany. Oh, if you had only, you don't provoke the bear. Now see what's happening. But if you take that argument to the end of it, and if you look back at the events in Ukraine, things started getting really bad after the Ukrainian people decided to turn economically towards the EU. There were many discussions whether NATO was a right decision or not, but if you say, like, you don't provoke the Russian bear, if it means that the Ukrainian people don't have the sovereign choice to say our future is more in the European world than with the Russian world, then that's a vision I do not share. And I think events since then, to me, personally, have proven that the criticism from the Polish side was the more accurate one. And I'm not saying this because my Polish colleague sits next to me. No, it was criticism and arguments always help. I would not like to live in a country where 99.9% always believe the same things. And we have very strong debates about the war at the moment. If you follow German politics, there's a petition, make peace now, etc., etc. It's a very important domestic policy debate, and it makes you stronger to allow diversity. But I think what is quite clear now is when you look at NATO expansion, there was a reason behind it. It was not that people in Washington thought, we have to push NATO eastward, we have to push NATO eastward, we have to do this. Because I'm quite sure that many people in the US public sphere wouldn't even know where these Baltic countries are that the Americans committed themselves to defending. But we completely underestimate the desire of the Central European countries to actually have this kind of protection. You mentioned Poland, you will talk about other of the Finnish experience and others, and the Baltic states, for instance, who wanted exactly that kind of protection because they said, we don't trust, we worry about Russian imperialism. And a country like Georgia had made the experience before also that part of Georgia was invaded by Russian troops and so-called small republics declared independence. So the fear was justified, and it still is justified. I would like to, that's a very important point. Another point in the Zeitenwende was also, and this is something we have to learn now, is the nuclear dimension of this. Ambassador Daley mentioned it. How would you feel if your country is regularly threatened with nuclear strikes? And this makes this war so different from many other wars. Because here we have a nuclear-armed superpower that threatens nuclear strikes, not just on the neighbor, but how many times on Poland, on the UK, on France, on Washington. I can recommend you a very interesting Twitter account. It's by a Ukrainian lady called Julia Davis, and she does Russian media monitoring. So she translates Russian TV shows into English for most of us who don't speak Russian. And if you hear the debates there, wow, that's quite something. Let's flatten them, let's nuke them, let's do that. I'm not saying that this is the only place. I was also scared when President Trump threatened to do that on Twitter. Let's nuke North Korea. Or when President Kim of North Korea says, we will fury and fight, we will destroy all the world. But it's a very different and new dimension, and that's also this which makes this war, this particular war, so global. Because if the lesson of this is like, the only way to arm myself against a nuclear superpower is to get myself nuclear weapons, then just look around from Thailand and the region. Maybe the military government in Myanmar would say, we feel safer when we have nuclear weapons. Would that be in Thailand's interest? I mean, North Korea as an example, they made this, despite all the sanctions, they acquired nuclear weapons. Is the world a safer place? I would put a big question mark on it. To look forward, where does this all end? I don't have a crystal gaze, but you can analyze like the side from Russia, you can analyze their military means. And there are lots of military accounts who say like how many people have actually died, and it's a tragedy for every loss of life. And you see the first mobilization, we might have a second wave of mobilization. I think it's important to see how many thousands of young Russians basically just escaped over the border. That is completely understandable. That shows how much or how little they think of this war. But if I look at the hardware, of course, Russia has a lot of military hardware still. Aircraft, the Russian fleet, and of course, the nuclear dimension. If you look at economic means from the Russian side, the Russian economy has not collapsed, but it's hurting. But nobody expected a collapse from the Russian economy very quickly. If you can see how long economies can survive under economic sanctions, look at North Korea, look how long the apartheid regime in South Africa survived under sanctions. So sanctions will take a long time. And then this question of international support. I don't see a lot of open support, but I see a lot of sympathy from many countries who just had enough of American unilateralism. And to say, yeah, but what about Iraq? What about this? What about that? And my answer to that is two wrongs don't make a right. If you were against the Iraq war in 2003, there's no reason that you should support this war. How does it look like for Ukraine? It's a huge strain on the Ukraine military. And I think without our support, without US support mainly, but also Poland and other countries, things would look very differently. It's very hard for an economy to survive with all the strikes on civilian infrastructure, with so many people actually running away. The main thing is international support. And international support is also moral support. That other countries say this will not stand. We hear, and there's a third thing we see very clearly on this, that the US is fully back as a European power. We're here in the Department of European Studies. I think the US is back on that continent. There were waves of like the US withdrawing and then coming back. And at the moment, if it were not for the US, we wouldn't be where we are. We all want peace, and discussions about peace proposals will take shape, but for peace on what grounds? If I hear the word accept realities on the ground, it means might is right. That's very clear. So if I also hear, I'm very curious to see what the Chinese proposal would like, how they balance like legitimate concerns of a superpower with territorial integrity and sovereignty. If by legitimate concerns of a superpower you mean I can just go into my neighboring country and annex part of it, then to me that's not a legitimate concern. If it's about security guarantees, this is something that we lived with for a long, long time. The OSCE, the treaties that NATO and the Warsaw Pact had, the treaties that we have with the agreements that we have with Russia also after the end of the Warsaw Pact about like verification missions, all that can be addressed, but not to go into your neighboring country and annex them. And it doesn't stop there. That's the clear indication that we are having. Crimea was the first step, now is the next step. So a peace which is not built on international law is not a just and lasting peace. And by the way, nobody talks about a total defeat of Russia. Nobody talks, unless only the Russian people themselves on television, they talk, they want to destroy us, they want to take everything away that's from Russia. No, I completely agree with like, it would, if the Russian troops withdrew tomorrow, it's a dream, but nobody would push militarily into Russia. It's complete nonsense. And so Russia would stop the war. Russia can stop the war, but Ukraine would finish. I finish with one saying, like, I understand the desire for neutrality for many countries, including Thailand. It's far away, big countries are fighting, it's a murky situation, what happened before. But I think, and many others said that, there should be a very clear distinction between the aggressor and the attacked. And when I hear statements also from ASEAN that call on both sides to calm down, I think that doesn't reflect the situation. It's like I'm beating up my wife and somebody tells me, hey, the two of you calm down. It's not right. And if you don't have that distinction clearly in your head, I think then there's something wrong with the analysis. And we hope for peace, but so far I would only see that there's a chance for peace when you cannot achieve your aims with military means. We will keep the diplomatic lines open. We will continue to talk to Russia. We will try to find, is there an opportunity, is there a chance? But it's peace, not a surrender. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Schmidt. Ambassador just expand the view on what is the silent vendor or this epochal shift. So there were two elements. So the way that Germany was underestimate Russia in the past, and this going to be these German and Russian relations going to be changed from the silent vendor, and also the aspect of nuclear dimension and nuclear threatening from Moscow. And what strikes me most is the word support is different thing from sympathy. And you mentioned Thailand. Yes, of course, Thailand and ASEAN countries, they sympathize Ukrainian, but they avoid to put Russia and Ukraine in the aggressor and victim nexus, right? And it's not enough, right? And you also mentioned about the NATO's expansion, which will draw us to our next panelist because Finland, right? Students may know that Finland is non-aligned state and treasure her neutrality. And Finland share borders over 1,340 kilometers with Russia. But this is the first time Finland also have a shift in her foreign policy, right? Abandon her neutrality, are sending armed support to Ukraine. And as you know, that the most unprecedented change was the decision to submit NATO membership application with Sweden in May 2022, despite various threatening words from Moscow. So I'm very thankful that we have Finnish ambassador to Thailand, His Excellency Mr. Jirik Javjärho is with us. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nathanan, and thank you very much for European Department for organizing this important discussion. This is a pleasure to be here with all my colleagues with this important issue, and especially this week when we get full 1 year of this horrible war in Ukraine. Now, if I think of my lifetime, I was born in 1960s, so I lived quite a long time during the Cold War. So the two big changes, or Zeitenwende, have been basically the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991, and the other one was last year when Russia attacked Ukraine. Those two are turning points in many ways. First of all, the 91 collapse of Soviet Union changed the structure of Europe quite profoundly. Obviously, let's say Eastern European countries like Poland had a chance to join, first of all, NATO and also European Union and so forth. And at that point, in Finland, I think the thought was probably maybe that let's first move towards the European Union and not hesitate, not be in a hurry with the military alignment. And of course, in 1990s, we did not know what kind of Russia we will get later on. Now we know. Now we know, of course, it's not a pretty picture. But at that point of time, we thought that, okay, maybe we can engage Russia. Maybe it may have some kind of international cooperation with them, and maybe even it can have some democratic traditions. We thought that profoundly. But obviously, we were wrong. I agree with my colleagues here, and especially George mentioned that probably we were a bit naive maybe at that point. There was a chance for Finland as well to join NATO already early 1990s. But since our calculation at that point, we did not use that option. Nevertheless, we became part of the European Union and part of the West very clearly. And then moving on to last year, when Russia did its aggression towards Ukraine, and now we have followed already 1 year of all these atrocities in Ukraine with Russian groups and so forth. It's clear that Russian integration into European or Western economic structures is over for the moment. The European Union has approved already several sanction packages. It's supporting Ukraine. Western companies are leaving Russian markets. Russian oil and gas has been largely cut off from the Europeans, and the Europe has turned into other markets. And luckily, we have found another sources for energy. And I think if there's one good thing about this whole situation, it is that the green transition has accelerated very fast in Europe. Now that I read lately that the wind and solar power in Europe is building up very fast. In Finland, these days, 25% of electricity is produced by wind power. So that's a major change in our system as well. So we are now living in a totally different world. And of course, we must remember that actually war started already in 2014 by Russian illegal annexation of Crimea at that point, and support in the Ukraine separatist forces. Now, of course, Ukraine has the right to defend itself. This is provided by United Nations Charter. And all United Nations member states have a right and moral obligation to support Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. And Ukrainians are defending not only their country and homes, and of course they're losing their lives every day as we speak, but they're defending the universal values of United Nations Charter, sovereignty, and independence and democracy, and in fact European security as well when they do that. Of course, their courage and resolve is admirable. They, of course, deserve our support fully. As explained by my colleagues already, the European, the US, many other countries as well are supporting Ukraine. Finland has supported already by 760 million euros humanitarian aid, but also military equipment and so forth. But now, going to the issue of NATO membership, just a few months before the war, the NATO support by the Finnish people was just 25 or 28% in Finland. After the aggression began, the support rose up to 55 to 60% almost immediately. And just a couple of months after, and now it's around 80% of the population are supporting NATO membership. And of course, the brutal war crimes that Russian troops are committing is even increasing this more. And of course, in our history, we have an experience of our war with the Soviet Union at that time. In 1939, the Soviet Russia attacked Finland. We were not aligned by any country, with any country, and therefore we had to fight alone against Russian aggression. And we know that this is very, very difficult for a small country. So in this sense, we feel the solidarity for Ukraine at this point. But we also understand our position. We can never beat Russia alone. and especially we don't have nuclear weapons. So this was part of the reason and the discussion, the early, let's say, months of last year. And if we think about the reasons why we applied the membership, of course, we realized immediately that the world has changed, 24th of February last year. We saw that Russia is now more prepared to take increased military and political and economic risks in order to gain its targets. The Russian invasion demonstrates its ability to exert pressure on probably any of its neighbors, bringing more than 100,000 soldiers just like that to the borders and attacking. At the beginning of the war especially, we saw the loose speech by Russians on the unconventional weapons, nuclear weapons and so forth. And also, as I mentioned earlier, wars also have rules. We cannot accept the atrocities against civilians in this war. We fully support the investigation of war crimes by Ukraine authorities and the International Criminal Court and the United Nations. And one of Russia's demands for Ukraine and the West was that NATO should not expand. In our security policy, we had a so-called NATO option in our security policy doctrine earlier. The idea is that when the security environment changes, we have the option to apply NATO membership. And we did not want anyone else to decide that for us. It's a choice of a sovereign nation to choose its path, which organization it wants to belong, and so forth. And finally, of course, Finland has this 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. We are not far from St. Petersburg. And we have this memory of war with the Soviet Union. And of course, Finnish application to NATO was a response for Russia's efforts to dismantle European security system and to create a new sphere of interests in its borders. And I think this point is making all Russian neighbors at the moment very nervous. We hear already now about Moldova and their problems with Russian influence in that area as well. Now, today, 28 out of 30 NATO members have ratified the protocol for Finland's and Sweden accession to NATO. We are now waiting for Turkey and Hungary to finally ratify. We have a special process with Turkey. They have some special criteria for us, and we have tried to do our best to comply with some of the criteria. We believe that by the July this year, when NATO has the summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, both Sweden and Finland will be members of NATO. That's our aim. We would like to join together since the, let's say, cooperation between Finland and Sweden has been very deep and security issues throughout the years. And we see that the Northern European security needs us both. We would bring more security for Northern Europe by joining together. So maybe that's all for now, and I'm ready to answer questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Joviaho. Ambassador explained us about this evolution of the NATO doctrine in Finnish foreign policy to join NATO. Especially, I've heard the two main reasons. The way that Finland realized that Russia could do anything, could be capable of doing anything. And the second point is atrocity that did happen in this war. And Ambassador also tell us about how Finland managed to finding alternative and renewable energy in this Russia and Ukraine war. So thank you so much. Now, the final round, I would like to ask each ambassador to leave any comments, or I can pick up, there was like a kind of humanitarian issues, the uprooted people, the energy, or any topics that you would like to leave to the younger generation here on this 1 year of the war. Let's start with EU Ambassador David.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to applaud what my colleagues have said. I think they've made extremely important points which show that from individual national perspectives, there are very important insights to be had. And of course, they also form part of our discussion at the EU level as to what we should do. I think there are a couple of points I would pick up on. One is the question of, again, a miscalculation, one I didn't mention, but Ambassador Dobianski mentioned it, that indeed the wider international community also has been very solidaire, as we'd say in French, great solidarity. And you can include in that the United Kingdom, the US, and the EU. We have been working very much in lockstep, and that explains why the sanctions regime, for example, it has 40 countries implementing sanctions against Russia. I would also pick up on the point of when looking at the war from this sort of distance, that the question of labeling is indeed very important. It is important to break through this sense that we're talking about two equal partners having a fight, having a conflict. This question of aggressor and victim is very important to understanding the wider implications of the war all over the world, because everybody has neighbors, large or small. And there are indeed many hotspots and existing wars, but the actual invasion of one large neighbor into a smaller, this needs to be recognized as not just some minor disagreement between equal parties. And that plays into the point of this is not just about Europe. I very much admired the very pithy saying that the Polish ambassador has used when talking about, oh, let's have peace and let's have dialogue and how can it be achieved and so on. There is a simple way of having peace, which is for the war to stop, for the aggression to stop. Russia can, by stopping to fight, Russia stops the war. And it's absolutely evident that there would be no appetite on anybody's part for the war to continue if Russia left Ukraine, that the war would continue beyond the borders into Russia. This is absolutely absurd. But in all of this, I think there is it is important to very carefully analyze the situation and the information that people are exposed to, because It's just too easy for one side to say of another, everything he says is propaganda, none of it is true. There are reference points which should be used in order to critically evaluate the information that is being received. This is a quality university. You know what serious study, what serious analysis is all about. And this university is itself a reference point in terms of the assessments you do on different topics. And of course, the same is true internationally. If you have a study from Yale University that shows that the impact of the sanctions is quite severe, that indeed the foreign companies who are leaving Russia, they account for a staggering percentage of Russian GDP. This is serious analysis that has to be treated seriously and can help you to find the objectivity. So know your sources whom you trust and be wary of simplistic assessments which essentially are propagandist. Everything I think that we have said on this panel is open to being assessed and checked and so on, and you will find our views to have been very well grounded. So I would limit it to that. Thank you.
Let's start again. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. Remember. So having said that, I have to say that today Russia is pursuing its aggressive policy, and basically all the countries across the globe, they have to cope with energy and food insecurity, unsustainable supply chains, high levels of inflation, and somehow unpredictable markets. And of course, these all challenges require coordinated responses, not only from US, not only from Poland, not only from EU, but also from Asia-Pacific countries. So we have to together isolate Russia, we have to sanction Russia, we have to show clearly our solidarity at any international forums. And I know, by the way, that today we are dealing with an extremely intelligent audience and listeners. As usual, it is the case at Chulalongkorn University, so credit to you. But having said that, I always have to repeat that disinformation remains one of the tools in Russia's arsenal, aimed not only at justifying its aggression against Ukraine, but also at disturbing Western information space, hijacking sort of our minds and belief system. The target of this information attacks by the Russian is not only Ukraine itself, it's also the Western world, it's also Asian countries, so they attack our common values, our common principles as well. So, and we have to remember that Russia is the master of propaganda, especially that very sort of the bad and poisonous propaganda. So, but this what this one of the instrument they're using. So, I mentioned because always you have to carefully listening and selecting the information which are being provided by many media. So as Ambassador Daly has mentioned, every single piece of information which had been said during this discussion could have been easily checked and proved. But always try to be careful listening to this information which are being provided by aggressor. They have their own interest, and they don't care. Thank you very much.
Okay, now you're subjected to a second round of statements, but okay, I hope there's still time for some questions from your side. I'll make 2 points which I haven't made before. One is, it comes often in the discussion, yeah, but Russia did this and this in the past, or the Soviet Union did this and this in the past. And we hear that quite often, like from countries that were thankful to the Soviet help in their respective struggles. And I would just say, yes, but that sense of gratitude for their respective struggles is a Soviet. It should extend the same way to Ukraine as to Russia. And it's the same, sometimes we are mixed up in our German policy debates. We say we have a particular responsibility towards Russia. Yes, there is a particular historic responsibility towards Russia. If I look at what the German Wehrmacht has done and inflicted incredible pain and crimes, all the crimes that you talked about, but the crimes were also inflicted upon Ukraine. So the same sense of solidarity and responsibility should apply to Ukraine. That's my point number one. My point number two is to come back about borders and revision of borders. And if you look at the map of the world today, there are lots of borders that cut through cultural communities for very different reasons. And when I was Africa director, I thought it was very clever of the African Union to say, some of these borders don't make sense. They cut right through linguistic groups. So on both sides of the border, you have people who speak the same language. Just because one country was colonized by France and one country was colonized by the UK, we're still living with that border. But I think it was very clever of the African Union to say, let's not start fight about these borders. Let's make them become irrelevant, meaningless. Let's open the borders with economic union and others. We learned that in Europe only after 2 bitter world wars. We were stupid because we should have done that much earlier. We didn't. So, and I think ASEAN is also very clear about not changing borders by force. And I give you a provocative example. If suddenly one day armed men in uniforms, well-armed, well-coordinated, appeared in the 3 southern border provinces of Thailand, Yala, Narathiwat, and Pattani, and organized under gunpoint a referendum to say, these people have been suppressed. They're Muslims, they're Malay-speaking, they're suffering from centuries-old injustice. Now we want to give them the right to express where they really belong to. What would happen? Now you might shake your heads and would say, no, the neighboring country would never do that. But this is what happens in Crimea. This is what happened in Donbass and Luhansk. And there are a lot of creative examples how you deal with linguistic and cultural differences. We have a lot of these examples also in Europe of autonomy and others. But changing borders by force, which the Russian Federation is trying to do now, to me is not acceptable.
Indeed, just good to continue from that. In basic terms, of course, moving borders with military force does not belong to 21st century. We must understand that. We all should agree on that. And of course, at least I start thinking that Russia was losing Ukraine because it's not developing itself economically. It's only looking on its military might and so forth. It of course gets funding from selling oil and gas, natural resources, but it hasn't developed its own economy. There's no innovation, not too much. So obviously Ukraine was looking towards Europe. This is an economic competition, and by military force, you cannot change that. You should be not able to change that. But having said that, I think and I believe it would be in Finland's and everybody's interest to have economically, politically, culturally developing and stable Russia, integrated in the world economy, having peaceful relations with all its neighbors. That would be ideal. We would love that. But at this point, of course, extremely important aspect of international relations, the trust has been lost completely to Russian leadership. Therefore, it's so difficult to start discussing about peace. How do you discuss about peace if you don't have trust at all? So this is the dark moment, but hopefully, of course, we know that at the end of the day, at some point, we will negotiate about peace, and there will be peace in Ukraine as well. I'm sure about that.
Thank you very much, all ambassadors. I'm wondering whether we have questions from the participants.
My question to users would be, why is there no consensus on the end state of the war from the EU yet? Because this will determine the level of support that Ukraine is going to get, right? Because if you're talking about going back to 1991 border, then definitely Ukraine needs longer range missiles. And if it is 2014, then it is probably another level of support. And also what kind of timeline, because Ukraine is going to have a presidential election in 2024, and I think it's very important for the European path to have a peaceful election. So I'm just wondering what will move the EU to have a consensus on this end state of the war, and what should it be? Thank you.
Let me explain how I understand the question. If the question is about how the European Union will form its consensus on what an end game for Ukraine will look like, there are different aspects to this. The first is that we see the end game as being what I already mentioned, that to ensure that a democratic Ukraine prevails, to ensure that its borders are no longer violated by Russia, these other elements that I mentioned. Now, how will we as the European Union form our views on these questions? It's the same as we do today on the current assessment of the situation, or indeed on any other issue. We have a strong, internal, vibrant political debate within the European Union, with 27 sovereign states around the table, each one with its own history, its own situation, its own perspective. But they are all united, and we are all united, by a particular sense of values. These are the values, indeed, of democracy, of respect for human rights, of respect of your neighbor, of treating people with dignity, of working, as we have worked in Europe for so long, to try and make our borders between our sovereign member states, to make those borders increasingly irrelevant. They will never totally disappear, in my view, but making them increasingly irrelevant has been very important in the European story. Now, based on these strongly held common values, of course, with a vibrant internal debate, we will form our assessment of what an end game will be like. And one thing that sometimes is confusing for outsiders, and it's something not to mistake, is that in the European Union, by definition, there are always many different voices, different perspectives. It's a democracy. It's messy. But if you ask people, what's the EU position? At one level, you can get 450 million positions if you ask each individual. But if individuals across member states elect governments, so governments outline their political positions. And within and around the council table of the European Union, we hammer out solutions. And that is something that we are very good at and that we have done over a long, long time. And on this issue, it would be no different. I hope that addresses the question, that I understood it properly.
Oh, so if I may just simply 2 sentences, because I believe that usually the best way of explanation is provide some examples. So if you remember 2 weeks ago, more or less, it was President Zelensky visiting the European Parliament. And honestly, I never ever remember that anyone from head of states had ever such a great and excellent welcome, and you feel in the air in the European Parliament that solidarity is there and the support from all the Europeans. Doesn't matter whether they are Germans, Poles, Dutch, or some other guys. So all of them applauded, all of them supported. It was a standing ovation. So it definitely shows the position and sort of the consensus without any specific debate, that definitely all the Europeans within the European Union would like to understand each other without saying. Thank you.
It's interesting that you asked this question, because Europe is not at war with Russia. The Russians, they haven't even declared war on Ukraine. They have declared a special military operation. In Russia, you can still go to prison if you call it a war. So we are not at war with Russia, but we are deeply involved in this war. And so it's first and foremost, I think, for the Ukrainians who are fighting for their survival to decide where to go and how to do it. That they do it in very close consultation with the countries that support them, that is also clear. And on the during the Munich Security Conference, the Ukrainian foreign minister, he specified, and he said the liberation of all Ukrainian territory. But he said one other important aspect: peace will only come if at one point Russian society will realize what has happened in their name and will apologize to Kiev for what they have done. And I can say this is far off. It's a very difficult process. And as a German, I know what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for a wonderful presentation. My name is Solomon Odero. I'm a Kenyan, and I'm happy to sit here. And Your Excellency, Mr. George, I am so privileged that you've been in Africa, and we face some challenges, and you really understand. Like the boundaries between African countries, especially you've been to Kenya and Uganda, we don't consider those boundaries so much, because I can't sleep in Uganda and wake up in Kenya, and it is just okay. And this is something that could also be applied in Europe and in other European countries, because those boundaries, in as much as they were drawn by the colonizers in our situation, but as Africans, we have realized that unity is more important than any other thing. I'm so happy with the presentation that you made, specifically Your Excellency George, that diplomacy could be the more solution to this aggression in Ukraine. And based on my understanding, if Russia stop war in Ukraine, then there would be no war. But if Ukraine stops war in Russia, then there will be no Ukraine. But if the world also attack Russia, there will be no world. That is another fact. So with the diplomatic relations that you have with Russia, how can we leverage on that strength to ensure that we bring Russia into the table? I do not know why they are not interested in talking, but I think this is the only and the best solution, because aggression and attack, we are dealing with a military power with weapons who can destroy the world just in a twinkle of an eye, and we have to really work with them in a very professional and intellectual manner, and bringing a negotiation as the best alternative to this kind of aggression could be working. So I really want to put it to you that you have more responsibility to talk with Russia than any other person, because they may listen better to your words than US, than Poland, and than any other person. Again, Russia has a lot of interest in other parts of the world. Like today, the Sino-Russia African Summit is very strong. And unless the sanction is also going to affect Africa, we might not end this soon, because the trade that goes between Russia and Africa in my country right now is very strong, that we must involve all these other African countries as well to realize. Today, food prices in Kenya is very high because we depend on Ukraine, and we have been supporting Ukraine, and we must continuously support Ukraine, but then this support must be seen actively by the European Union through negotiation and diplomacy. Thank you.
I completely agree with you that there's a huge responsibility to talk, but to talk from a position of strength. But to talk it in a measured way, to calmly, and this sounds easy as we are sitting here, we are not being bombed, we are not sitting in the cellars, we are not facing all the attacks that the Ukrainians are facing, but to calmly tell Putin that this aggression will not stand, back down, and to do it repeatedly. And yes, I agree, we have a big responsibility, although I think that our influence, we're being seen by the Russians as already they're part of that camp. And I don't believe that we have particular additional leverage now, but I think it's important to play the ball back, that also the Russians hear that from other countries' leaders, and especially to hear from them, like what you say in Kenya, what's happening with the grain? What's happening with, I mean, for the first time, the WHO, we couldn't buy enough grain to support the crisis in Somalia, for instance, or to support the refugee camps in Kenya, by the way, some of the largest refugee camps in this world. And before it was a question of finding the money, but now it's a question of finding the grain. Now, who blocks the Black Sea? It's not the Ukrainians who block the Black Sea, it's the Russian fleet. And I salute the efforts from the United Nations and Turkey to have the Black Sea Initiative and the Grain Initiative. And we have increased our cooperation, we have increased our contributions for food security and others in many, many areas. So yes, we see this, we see the implication, and that's why I think it's particularly tragic that people who have so little and have no stake at all in this fight are suffering sometimes the most. If I say that, maybe you believe me because I was in African policy in the Africa Directorate, but I think if people tell that to Mr. Putin also from different perspectives, I don't know how much this will change his mind. We were very happy, not very happy, but I think it was important that our Chancellor went to China, and for the first time we got a clear statement, a clear foreign policy statement from Xi Jinping saying that we don't accept nuclear war. And when Wang Yi was now in the Munich Security Conference, he also repeated nuclear wars should not be fought should not be done. That's an important step also by China. So yes, we have to build bridges. We have to explain our position. We have to make sure that we want to cushion the blows of this war also to third countries, and we're very much aware of it. What's happening there, and the sooner this ends, the better. You asked about the timeline. Nobody can tell you about the timeline. 2024 elections in Ukraine, elections in the US, free and fair elections in Russia. I would put a question mark on that. But nobody knows. I mean, people predicted that Ukraine would fold within 5 days, and it didn't. People would predicted that Russian economy would fold within 6 months, and it didn't. And unfortunately, this can go on for a long, long time. Maybe one point also that you hinted at, Russia has very dangerous weapons. That is why we're treading so carefully. We don't take this threat not seriously. If somebody threatens, veiled or unveiled, to destroy you, and at the same way also that what you said, like to destroy yourself, this is a huge responsibility. It's a huge responsibility for world peace, not world war, but world peace. And again, I wish that more countries would also say, stop threatening the use of nuclear weapons. I haven't heard any statement from ASEAN, correct me if I'm wrong, about the non-use of nuclear weapons. ASEAN countries feel strongly about the nuclear-free zone, but I haven't heard any statement from here like the Chinese are saying, stop the use of nuclear weapons. And it's a huge challenge. How do we find the right balance between this aggression must stop, but not to be counter-aggressive? And this falls to us, but I would say it's a global responsibility. And it's particularly painful to see for so many people who have little to say, now the Europeans are doing it again, and we are drawn into a conflict which is not of our own making. I can very much understand that feeling.
Thank you very much. Just 2 points very quickly following on from what Ambassador Schmidt said. First is also in relation to the grain exports. We as the European Union have established what we call solidarity lanes, which are transport lanes to facilitate the export of Ukrainian grain to the outside world. And under these solidarity lanes, since last April-May, over 28 million tons of grains from Ukraine have been able to be exported onto the world market. And the second thing is just to reiterate in this context of the food security aspect, to reiterate what I said earlier, namely that EU sanctions have no impact on this food security issue. There are no sanctions on Russian food or fertilizer exports, but rather, as the ambassador said, Russia has been doing its own blockading of Ukrainian exports, and even in addition to that, Russia has restricted its own exports of Russian grains at a certain critical moment in the course of last year. So be very careful about this question of food security and so on. And again, look at what organizations like the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, or the World Food Programme have to say about this. Early last year, in the period March-April, the WFP was predicting that if the war in Ukraine continued, it would add something like 50 million people globally onto the list of food insecure population, taking it from something like 180 million worldwide to 230 million. These things can be checked out. Thank you.
I'm John. I'm representing the student think tank on Europe-Asia relations. So my question mostly pertains to essentially ASEAN, the ASEAN side, which is perhaps relevant from where we are. And yes, we have seen there's been an EU-ASEAN struggle to find solidarity on the conflict in Ukraine, let alone perhaps Myanmar as well. And we recently had the EU-ASEAN summit in Brussels in December, where we hoped that there would have been progress on there. Since then, it may have been quite lukewarm, though it was 2 months ago. And just add on that on what Mr. Georg-Schmidt said on non-nuclear proliferation, which ASEAN side has been mute on. There was one section that wasn't mute, and that was the youth who sent youth recommendations to Brussels, reiterating this front. And also from Mr. Georg-Schmidt, I saw you. I think remember we were talking about where you were discussing the issue during June, during a seminar, I think a similar seminar on the EU-ASEAN relations in light of the war in Ukraine. So perhaps my question is, well, what is the future of EU-ASEAN relations in light of the war in Ukraine as of 21 February 2023?
Thank you very much. Firstly, we have to recall that the EU-ASEAN summit held in Brussels in December was a first, and we're very pleased to have reached this first with ASEAN. It reflects the fact that over recent years, EU-ASEAN relations have increased significantly, and particularly in late 2020, we launched the strategic partnership between the European Union and ASEAN. So this is the first thing I would say. Second thing is, of course, we want this relationship to go even further. Now, it is in the nature of this type of diplomatic relations that, of course, we need to make progress step by step based on what we can agree. And you will see in the summit statement, you will see language in relation to the war in Ukraine. This language, because it has been agreed by 37 countries, naturally is a compromise. There are many of us on the EU side would have wanted stronger language. There are others who are more hesitant. That is part of the nature of this sort of diplomatic process, and we have to accept that. The key thing is for us to continue to have strong dialogue on these sorts of issues so that we can understand each other better, convince each other of our own positions and so on. The normal sort of diplomatic process. Of course, we see within ASEAN that there are widely different views in relation to the war in Ukraine, which is an additional complication on the ASEAN side of the table. But this issue is so important that, of course, it gets raised between the EU and ASEAN, but equally, it is an issue which all the time must be treated at the global level. And this is why I refer again to the fact that this week there will be a vote in the UN General Assembly. And we urge all UN members to support this resolution, which sets out the UN Charter principles that should underlie any comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I will tell you one truth about our center activity, you know. After the first hour passed, half of the room empty. This is the first time that everybody stayed put and tied fully seated in the room. Thank you so much from bottom of my heart. And we made it for four of you could make it to these events, and we hope we see you in the next event. Yeah, as long as your mission was in Bangkok. And thank you all participants as well, and thank you for the questions. We have some snack box that you can collect and have a safe trip home. Thank you so much, and please follow us if we have another seminar or another academic events. Thank you so much. Okay, give a big round of applause to all the panelists.